All right. And as we move along, we are going to talking about change. We're going to talk about transformational change driven by transformational testing. We're going to bring Matt Clarke to the stage, head of engineering at Edge Testing. Matt, how's it going today?
Oh, very good, thank you. Thanks for
Great.
having me.
Yeah, no problem. So I can't wait to hear what you got to say. Let's give you the stage and take it away.
Thank you very much. Yeah, as you can probably tell, I'm coming from merry old England, where you'll be surprised to know it is raining, as is typical. I have the luxury today of talking to you about transformation, which for most of you will be a overused and tiresome buzzword. But thankfully, I can try and remove some of the buzzword nature and bullshit from that term and take you over a really interesting journey and what we do in some pretty major enterprise programs. So I work for a business called Eurofins. You may not know of them, but they do a lot of stuff from providing the food to the International Space Station to providing the security posture for a lot of G7 nations. And what I mostly do as a head of engineering and a chief architect is provide major digital transformation and enterprise delivery for big government programs of work. So these are 500 million, multi-billion dollar programs of work where we're implementing mission critical systems and moving away from a restricted sort of control plane into where we have a lot of freedom and a lot of innovation in those mission critical systems is kind of what I'm going to talk about today. And it might be a little bit different from the kind of commercial discussions and the commercial tools that you might be using in general, and just an insight to what we do in big government and the kind of things we do on the international scale. So I hope that's interesting. Um, One of the things I want to start on with, and I'll get into this briefly, Eurofins is a conglomerate, so you'll see little different names from different companies, but it's all one big thing. Um, is we are primarily an assurance company, and what we do is we provide assurance at extreme scales. So you're talking about hundreds of millions of transactions and um, tests of every kind being triggered continuously and concurrently in multiple enterprise environments internationally and across a really broad domain. And our primary objective is to use testing as a mechanism for change. So rather than conventionally, where in a business testing is a really boring gateway, it's a control function, it's a restriction, we're very much of this notion that testing is all about enabling development teams to develop faster. And the way that we do that is we develop these really sort of mature delivery pipelines and this new way of working in a structure that looks at if testing can be technically competent, if assurance can be driven by technical leaders with the capability to inspire, design, and articulate powerful systems for change, then testing becomes a mechanism that drives a lot of these things. And you might be surprised to see that this is a testing pipeline, not just a delivery pipeline. So when we're engaged to deliver large scale performance testing, which needs huge business analytics, business intelligence, and management information, or when we're engaged to provide cybersecurity services, it all goes through these sort of life cycles of change where even though we're carrying out testing, we treat it as this production service. Um, and we've taken all these considerations from policy as code, from really sophisticated CI/CD deployments where we have an ingrained DevSecOps posture that's managing all of our test services. It provides a huge amount of capability for development teams and business owners to move at great velocity. And that's done by taking back a lot of the blockers, taking back a lot of the responsibilities, and putting testing in the forefront of the minds of development teams, be those siloed, be those teams that integrate and work together, and making sure that there's a platform for development teams to constantly accelerate. So they don't need to worry about when they're going to meet X milestone, as long as they're constantly working with us to develop a product. Um, that feedback flow of constant iteration into what it is they're doing allows them to achieve things they never thought they could achieve before, right? So as an organization, we've delivered multiple large census programs, multiple large data programs, national security and defense programs, where you're doing everything from integrating performance scenarios and cyber scenarios and functional test scenarios into complex cloud estates using tools like GraphQL, and using other enterprise monitoring tools and API tools like Grafana and Prometheus and complex CI/CD solutions that are creating ecosystems that allow a developer to come along with huge amount of confidence deploy something into a staging environment or a pre-production environment and rapidly have that piece of change validated on so many levels. So that's non-functional, functional, regulatory, control, operational excellence, which is really key to all of this. And this is, like I say, it comes back into what we have developed as a testing pipeline. And when you deliver big enterprise projects, this is the kind of attitude that you need to have. You need to be moving quickly and being perfect from the get-go. And like I say, you might be surprised to see this is a testing design for conventional testing and that kind of thing. Oh, that looks a bit funky, doesn't it? Maybe I'll skip that one. These are the kind of roles. When we talk about transformation, you might be surprised again to know that we consider DevOps and SRE and DevSecOps resources to be part of that, as well as SOC and business analysts to all be part of the assurance and testing lifecycle. And when we talk about transformation in a conventional sense, it's usually how businesses go around digitizing their non-digital services. And 10, 20 years ago, that was definitely the case. Now it's really about how do you transition organizations that are already digital into a posture where they are high velocity, where they are developing a culture where people don't want to control, they want to enable. And this is really where testing comes in. And you might wonder how exactly that works. And for us, it means that we take the best resources we can, the best engineering teams that we can, and we take our DevOps engineers, and rather than have them be standard delivery resources, they're assurance resources. And their job is to accelerate delivery while providing a perfect feedback loop with business intelligence and management information, and really helping people understand the picture of what's happening in those really big enterprise programs. And again, that does not look good, does it? I will move on to another diagram, apparently. Apologies for that. Every time we go in to start a big complex managed service or an enterprise engagement where we have to consider how are we going to shift a customer or a client or a government organization from an undesirable state, because they must be in an undesirable state because they've come to engage with us, to a desirable state. And as a business that does insurance, we're always looking at what are the key atomic components that we can take away and look to enhance and deliver from a center of excellence or a center of maturity, and provide the leadership people are really looking for. Because a lot in these ways, people aren't really sure where to begin on what the outcome they're trying to achieve really is. So we try to take that away and design a solution that's really going to work for people, while also being totally frictionless. So our modus operandi, so to speak, is all about this notion of change control is for an organization that is slow moving. It is for an organization that doesn't understand its landscape. And we want to take people on a journey to where they are doing change enablement, where they are freed up with developers, DevOps engineers, and architects being able to iterate constantly because they have this huge safety net that's providing them all of the governance, all of the deployment capability that's allowing them to iterate constantly in their journeys. And this is really how we kind of begin with it. So to take it a step back, when we kind of implement transformation, a lot of the times, and I'm sure you'll have this own experience, is you'll have teams that either are happy to do things their way, don't really value the service you're bringing, or don't really value the purpose or the point of something because they can't understand or articulate the value of it. And it is the objective of a good test engineer, of a good person that owns test governance, to really bring that assurance into the forefront. Because assurance really is about enabling change. It's really about high velocity IT at the end of the day. It's not about providing that strict control. It's about making a frictionless platform for people to do their best work. And that's really what we mean when we talk about transformational testing. And when you get into a position where you are delivering mission critical services, you can no longer do testing in isolation. Everything is an exercise in integration. Everything is an exercise in how do I contribute to a development ecosystem? How do I integrate into a infrastructure ecosystem? And how does that fit into my testing? So when my developer, my development team drops in that new release, I want everything from my performance testing to my functional testing to my accessibility testing to my regulatory controls and compliance to be constantly triggered. And I want pure play production emulation engaged from the get-go. And that kind of capability allows government services to deliver really, really, really modern technology and really, really modern services. And what you'll find is organizations and governments and departments that embrace this kind of philosophy are able to produce amazing technical services for the public. If you ever look at the contrast of something like UK government's digital services to another G7 country like Japan, it's night and day. The government services provided by other nations are very much recursive, they're slow, they're very risk averse, and as a consequence, they haven't modernized a great deal over the last 10, 15 years. So that's kind of what we mean. These organizations that are willing to take the risk are able to produce a much better quality of service to the public that they serve and the businesses that they protect and defend. This is the solutions architecture for a test environment. And I don't mean an environment where testing is conducted. I mean an environment that produces test frameworks. So this is the solutions architecture that provides the testing tools that go away and validate the systems under test. So even though we are talking about something that is generally considered relatively modest when it comes to technical sophistication, we've taken the time to invest and develop a solution that allows operational excellence, huge amounts of ephemeral scalability, huge amounts of performance and cost efficiency, where you've got the ability to sustain hundreds of millions or billions of transactions, be those DDoS tests, performance tests, or a variety of non-functional tests or security tests in an ephemeral, elastic environment. And this is kind of what it looks like. A huge amount of thought can go into providing assurance as a platform or assurance as a service when it comes to looking at how can I provide my client, my customer, or my business, or the organization that I'm in, the best possible platform to assure what they're doing and provide all of the business intelligence and management information that's going to go to my change owners, my product owners, to inform them where their risks really are, where their high value really is, and where there's an opportunity to implement that change, which is going to drive an organization through its transformation. So if you're ever looking at, if I'm going to go deliver testing for a big project, what does that look like? Because it's not going to be a bunch of automation frameworks or test frameworks that live in isolation. It's going to be a sophisticated system that's driven by data, that's driven by information, that is driven by feedback into my core product lines, into my development teams, into my business owners. And this is what an environment that supports that kind of posture really looks like. And I hope that's surprising to people, that anyone would invest the kind of resources we have and other businesses have in developing test harnesses and test frameworks to do nothing else than provide assurance. Because we have seen time and time again, when you make that investment, when you're willing to take development teams and architecture teams and DevOps engineers and any other kind of role on that journey from, don't just look at yourselves, look at how you integrate into the rest of your ecosystem, look at how that impacts the team, and look about how you compare to your other development teams when it comes to performance, when it comes to operational excellence, when it comes to security. Here's the information, here's the platform that's going to help you grow and improve. And you're going to suddenly find that a team that thought it was happy to achieve X suddenly wants to achieve Y. And when it does achieve Y, it's setting a new standard or achieving a new outcome that it never thought it was possible to do. And with this kind of attitude in place, you get amazing digital services like the UK Census that happened recently, or things like the EU Exit program, where huge numbers, tens of millions of people are able to engage with the digital service in a short space of time, and tens of terabytes of data are able to move through a system within minutes and seconds. So I would encourage people to think about the value of testing from a perspective of technical excellence and what a platform for testing can really do to help a business go through change and utilize this hugely rich and powerful open source ecosystem that we all love and feed into. When you start to think about testing from a engineering discipline, you go look at, how do I enhance my business intelligence? How do I enhance my feedback? How do I enhance my enterprise monitoring? How do I enhance the scale and volume and sophistication of my testing? And then suddenly you're using the same kind of tools, the same kind of platforms as your development partners and your engineering teams. And then you'll get to a space like we had at the beginning of this presentation, where you've got this enormously sophisticated, incredibly robust, absolutely frictionless sort of delivery lifecycle, where you're covering every kind of concern and worry that any business or organization might have. I believe that is me done. I'm going to leave it on the other slide so all those weird text issues go away. Yeah, thank you for listening to me. I hope it was interesting. I hope that the testing element was a bit surprising. There is a lot that we're doing in government. There is a lot that we're doing for big businesses out there when it comes to this kind of thing. And I hope other organizations begin to embrace this kind of philosophy of high velocity, high complexity testing in their digital landscapes. So thank you.
Awesome. Really insightful on a lot of that. So let's give a round of applause in chat, but also any questions you might have around that presentation, toss those in chat as well. I have to say that that chart is impressive. How long did it take to kind of piece that together, and really what was the process for figuring all of that out? Because obviously going forward, it makes your life a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, the first time we ever did anything like this for government, it took a long time and it was terrible. And the second time we did it, it was a lot faster and a lot less terrible. And then the third time we did it, we kind of got it right. And we were able to take a lot of long hours and long nights and a lot of failure and provide a culture to the next generation of engineers of, let's give you a sandbox to fail safely and let you know that failure is a really good thing. And then work all that failure back into what we do. And then we finally got to a place where, you know, we now have these really complicated EC systems that we know are robust. Their infrastructure is code, they're reliable, they're consistent, they meet all the standards, but it was a long road. So what now takes us days or weeks to produce, it was a long journey of 2 or 3, 4, 5 years of failure and pain and sadness. But that's the reality of it, right? If anyone comes along and says, "Oh, we can produce magic," and it was super easy to figure out, there's probably a little bit of a shallowness to it.
Yeah. So you made a comment earlier about you know, wanting to go from just like a single integration or a single app into like an ecosystem. What's maybe the biggest hurdle to people in an organization understanding that transition? Obviously, like security folks at like a government institution might be like, yes, we want everything covered. But what are kind of some hurdles that we might have in non-governmental, but also in governmental work?
I think some of the things that people often fall over is understanding scalability, both horizontally and vertically. I mean, if you continue to add services and applications without any kind of architecture, strategy, or governance, you tend to get these environments, especially in the cloud, that are incredibly expensive, unknowable in content and size, and generally unmanageable. And you kind of get this runaway sort of cost problem, you get this runaway data problem, this runaway security problem. What we kind of find is, if you start out, and as boring as it is, the things that people have been saying for decades with clear requirements, clear governance, it really does help and it really does produce a difference. It's a super lame answer, but it is also the truth I found in practice.
Truths often are the most lame. I understand.
Yeah, no doubt.
Excellent. So we have a question from Ty Cooper in chat. Most governments are usually slow to adopt new technologies, and you kind of mentioned that with if you look at UK versus Japan. What's the data that you can showcase to government officials to convince them to move a little faster?
People have egos. Everyone knows that, and so do governments. And I can tell you, some governments don't like to be showed up by other governments. Despite these super important, big, critical national services, there's still a lot of childishness at heart with these people. So look at them and look at us is always a good thing to do. It kind of depends on the philosophy of the organisation you're in. In the UK, we have a luxury of where we have this thing called government digital services, where the government decided maybe 10 years ago that it needs to embrace digitization. So invested a lot of money and time in making it a priority. They immediately reduced the barriers around proprietary technology. All government code is public, for example. So any service that the government produces, it has to go public, has to be open source, has to be on GitHub, Bitbucket, these kind of services. It's a cultural thing. We're really lucky that we have that here. We're super, super lucky, actually. And I love to see other countries in the EU and that kind of thing embrace it, because ignorance, I think, is what holds back, and fear what holds back these super serious organizations. It's, if you're really actually that competent and you're really that capable of delivering security, then you shouldn't be terrified of change. If you really know what's going on and you have a platform that works, then change should be your friend. I think the evidence is in, you can look at the data that UK government and the US government produces on the success of their digital services. One of the best ones we saw is the digital census is the most successful census globally in history compared to all other censuses. And the big thing was, it was digital first, it was accessible, it was available, and it was all open source, right? So the proof is in the pudding, and that's what I would kind of say. Go look what's out there.
Nice. So we have a question from Dylan. With GraphQL-based systems specifically, a lot of the business logic you might want to test is contained within resolvers, which rely on external data sources to hydrate. How do you like to manage testing through these kind of behaviors while maintaining fully or mostly self-reliant testing frameworks?
I think that's a really good question. Data is probably data and access are probably the two biggest challenges in testing and in probably development as well, especially if you're coming on from the outside and going in. And managing data is really difficult for us. A lot of what we do is we try and store data in memory, and we try to provide a lot of synthetic data wherever it's possible. So it might be that we implement sort of asynchronous functions or sort of intermediary services to consume data that isn't immediately accessible to us. And it might mean that a CI/CD pipeline runs in stages or is a much slower process than we would like in some instances. Depending on the risk and reward sort of ratio, it might be that we go away and we implement a stub, we implement, like I say, an intermediate service to make up for a limitation in that space. As long as somewhere else we can prove the true flow and the true outcome and functionality of that service. It kind of just depends on time, accessibility, and availability, and that kind of thing. Probably not the best answer, but
when you're then kind of documenting that and showcasing that to your various stakeholders, how aware do you make them, and like how many caveats, I guess, do you enter in around stuff like that when you're talking about assurance?
I've found that complexity is not anyone's friend. And if you really know what you're talking about, and if you're really able to provide the outcomes that your CTO level resources want to hear, it's through simplicity. So usually what we do is visualization. I mean, it's super lame again. Bring it down to its simplest point. These are the areas that we think we can cover with assurance. This is the methodology we're going to focus on. This is where I think we're going to fall up short, and this is the risk that's going to be implemented around that. Testing is usually about risk conventionally, and risk management, if you're not focused on just pure change wherever possible.
Excellent. All right. Well, it looks like we don't have any more questions in chat. So
Sweet.
Matt, thank you so much. I know it's late over there, so I appreciate you staying up with us and giving us these insights.
They're happy to. Thanks for having me.